Todd passed away last Thursday evening, and never in a million years did I think his passing would cause such an emotional struggle within me. I've watched the slideshows, I've seen the posts and comments, and I've read the obituary. With the exception of the one photograph in the slideshow, one might not know that Todd was my stepdad for 10 years. Todd came into my life when I was 7 years old. It was the fall of 1993. My brother was 5, and my sister was maybe 3 months old. I remember the day I met him like it was yesterday. It was grandparents' day at school, and my grandma and grandpa brought me home that afternoon. Todd was the unfamiliar bald man with a Hulk Hogan mustache standing in our kitchen with my mom. They married in April 1995, and later that year we all moved to Dexter, Minnesota. The summer of 1996 is when we moved to Owatonna, Minnesota. We moved to Albert Lea in late 98, early 99. I believe my mom and Todd divorced in 2000 sometime, and in March of 2001, they got back together, and we followed Todd to Kiowa, Colorado. They all moved back to Minnesota the summer of 2003, and I stayed in Colorado to finish high school. I joined them in Minnesota in May 2004. Their relationship ended for good in 2005. In the course of those 10 years, I had a stepsister and 2 stepbrothers, a plethora of aunts and uncles and cousins, and 2 more sets of grandparents, some of which still claim me as their niece, granddaughter, or cousin to this day. We were a part of 4-H and heavily involved in showing cows and horses. We lived on multiple farms and always had lots of animals. Most of the decent, and I use that term loosely, memories that I have of and with Todd were in a barn or in a pasture, driving T-posts into the cold ground, building or repairing fence. As a matter of fact, my husband said to me the other day, "I think I met Todd once in the cow barn at the fair." Sounds about right. He listened to classic rock music, favoring bands like Lynyrd Skynyrd. He was a terrible dancer. Picture Elaine Frost waving after riding a bull, but also vigorously moving his feet and hips with very little rhythm. Todd's wardrobe could be summed up with a lot of bib overalls, flannel shirts, Carhartt anything, welding caps, Red Wing boots, woven belts, a copper bracelet, and not complete without a fresh tin of Copenhagen, original long cut. Y'all, I can still hear the sound of his fingers tapping on the can to pack it before he put a giant dip in his mouth. I can even still smell it. And you can imagine my disgust when I got to high school and the guys were spitting into an empty soda bottle. I asked what they were doing and was shocked to learn that you're not supposed to swallow it. He had no shame, no filter, very little discretion, and a knack for an inappropriate comment or joke every now and then. He was incredibly opinionated and was usually hell-bent and determined to always have the last word, no matter what. Things were done Todd's way or no way. There was no highway option. He was old-fashioned in that children were to be seen, not heard, which very well could have been the foundation of a lot of the conflict between us. I've never been the quiet type. He had a short fuse and a bad temper. He had a talent of stringing every cuss word together in a moment of rage if something wasn't working or if he stubbed his toe or hit his thumb with a hammer. He had high expectations. He ruled with an iron fist, very strict, no room for mistakes, and the consequences very rarely fit the crime. Full transparency, all that I've mentioned so far are just things that I remember about him, and it's taken me days to figure out how to describe a man that I so severely and intensely hated for 16 years. Honestly, hate hardly seems like a strong enough word. Loathed, despised. I detested this man with every ounce of my being. He sucked the life out of my most impressionable years. I won't go into detail about the awful way that he treated my family because not every detail is my story to tell. On October 30th, 2009, I was sitting in a bar with my friends. The door opened, letting a cold Minnesota breeze in. I turned around and there stood Todd. This was weird for a number of reasons. In the 16 years that I knew this man, he was 100% sober. Why was he walking into a bar? He lived a few hours away the last I knew. Why was he walking into this bar? And why wasn't I spiraling like I would have done any other time in his presence? I walked up to him, gave him a hug, and I said, "We need to talk." We stepped outside and talked for 45 minutes. I don't know why, but in that moment, I was just tired. Carrying the burden of hating him was exhausting. It was heavy, and I didn't want it anymore. I told him to take it. He apologized for what he did to me. He admitted that he was wrong and took responsibility for the results of his actions. I felt a physical weight being lifted off my shoulders as I gave him a tear-filled hug and offered my forgiveness. Over the course of the last 11 years, we did not pursue a relationship that went any further than being Facebook friends or sending Christmas cards. He would send me a DM on my birthday sometimes, but we spoke very rarely. The rest of my family still had their issues with him. I was able to forgive him for what he did to me, but it's not my place to forgive him for what he did to them. And I wasn't interested in suffering the consequences of what being friends with Todd publicly would warrant. Before a couple of weeks ago, I last saw Todd in October 2016. He was traveling through Oklahoma and called me to see if I was anywhere along his route. Not being far from I-40 or I-35, he stopped in to see me at work. I don't remember if we had lunch or if we just visited for a little bit before he was back on his way. I've never shared this photo before. It's literally one of less than a handful of photos of Todd and I that has not been torn down the middle, with his side nowhere to be found. The others being the photos we took 10 days before his passing. When I got the news that Todd was sick, it brought a lot of emotions to the surface, some of which surprised me. I was grateful that we had made amends all those years ago, but listening to Amanda talk about how close her and her dad were was a tough pill to swallow. Her dad and my stepdad just weren't the same person, or so it appeared. I was sad for my brother and sister and hoped that Todd might also get the opportunity to make amends with them. I channeled all those emotions into creating a custom design for a shirt fundraiser. I wanted to commemorate his passion for horses and motorcycles and bring those two communities together. The mane of the horse happens to be the headdress from the Indian motorcycle logo, and the color purple representing his fight with pancreatic cancer. I am proud of these shirts and happy to have been able to contribute in this way. So far, 72 shirts have been sold, with just over $700 raised and sent to his family. Photos that were posted of Todd throughout his fight with cancer would hit me like a ton of bricks. This man that was always built like a Mack truck, rough around the edges, tougher than nails, and took no shit, all of a sudden looked old, fragile, almost gentle. There was a softness in his eyes that I'd never seen before. I received word of Todd's rapid decline on March 11th. I had been in touch with Amanda and she was keeping me in the loop. I knew that it was important for my emotional and mental health to be able to say goodbye to Todd in person, and I knew it would be important to Todd as well, so I headed north. I think Todd was very surprised to see me, but he was in good spirits and for the most part his usual self. I was able to stay and visit with him and Amanda, as well as Tammy and Jessica, for a few hours. We took some photos and I told Todd I had one request of him, and I asked him to write a word on a piece of paper for me. I asked him to write forgiveness. When it was time for me to leave, I gave Todd a hug and I told him I loved him. The first, only, and last time I've ever said those words to him. I got word of his passing on Friday morning, and I was honestly at peace. I was glad I made it up to see him when I did, and I knew he was no longer in pain or discomfort. It wasn't until I saw the slideshow that I broke. It was almost like those 10 years of his life just never happened. Photos of him with his siblings and his parents and his kids and grandchildren. A glimpse into his love for horses and motorcycles and oldie bulldoggies. On family vacations and at family gatherings, graduations, weddings, all the major events. This man I did not recognize. He seemed happy and appeared to be loved by many. This man I never really knew. I don't write all this in an attempt to drag Todd's name through the mud. I don't tell this truth to try to change the opinions of those that loved him. This is just how I knew him. This is the impact he had on my life. There are surely qualities that, although may have been instilled in me the wrong way, but instilled nonetheless, that attribute to parts of who I am today. I am envious of those that knew the Todd described in his obituary, slideshow, and other tributes I've seen on social media. But I can honestly say that his apology was sincere and that we made the most out of what was left to salvage a friendship up until his last days. My sincerest sympathy goes out to Todd's parents, siblings, nieces, nephews, cousins, and aunts and uncles, to his friends and companions throughout the years. But my heart genuinely goes out to Matt, Amanda, and Adam, as well as their partners and children as they mourn the loss of their dad and grandpa. But I also wish to offer my condolences to my brother and sister, as they may or may not be mourning his loss, but also the loss of the possibility to ever have a positive relationship with him. My family honored Todd last Friday night by cooking homemade stroganoff and 7-layer bars, both items Todd was known to make often. Ben was just as big a fan of the stroganoff as I remember being as a kid, but the bars were a hit with both of my guys and will without a doubt be a staple in the dessert rotation. If you've made it this far, thank you for following along. I wanted to write a tribute that was honest and real, but ended with restoration, and that shows the power of forgiveness. Rest in peace, Todd Ray.